seeing the impact of not really being in that discussion at the federal level, but what you'll see today is some recommendations for us to be in that conversation at the state level at least. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jerry, but again, a lot you're going to see here is not new, but the static and what we've been talking about. So, Jerry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jerry Presley, Senior Manager of Government and Business Relations. Before we start the presentation, I just want to reiterate that this is a workshop. It is intended for it to be interactive. So even though I have a presentation, the presentation is really there to just serve as a guide to kind of keep us on tracks and maximize the opportunity for the discussions in the room. As each of you know, the HART staff has been actively working on implementing our 180-day action plan for our government relations program. And the development of the 2019 legislative agenda is a key component of that action plan. This agenda that we are working on should identify HART's funding and policy priorities for the next year and include local, state, and federal priorities. The purpose of creating the annual legislative agenda is really to help ensure that HART has a very well-defined, specific list of legislative funding and policy priorities that our agency supports and ultimately builds upon our mission, goals, and objectives. It's also designed to provide staff and our contract lobbyists with very clear goals and objectives so that we can develop an effective legislative strategy for the current year's activities. And finally, it's there to provide an effective tool for us to be able to communicate with our local, state, and federal partners. Now, just very briefly, I just want to kind of go over kind of the roles and responsibilities as it relates to the legislative agenda, and I know you guys are very aware of what your role is, but just as a reminder, the goal is to actively discuss and debate the policies and funding priority recommendations, to develop a final list of policy and funding priorities for our annual short and long range agendas that we will be working on this year, and to formally make a recommendation for our legislative agenda to the HART Board of Directors, and finally, to actively work with staff and contract lobbyists to promote and build support among our local, state, and federal partners. The role of staff in this process is to actively identify policy and funding priorities that help to support our mission. We are here to help develop a list of recommended policies and present that to this committee and to the HART Board of Directors for its approval and consideration. We are also here to make sure that we were providing you with all the technical assistance and guidance as we go through this process. So if you have questions or you need additional information for you to make a decision, we're here to serve you and help you in that process, understand these issues. And finally, our job and responsibility is to execute the adopted legislative agenda. Now, HART staff has already worked and developed a short list that we're going to present to you today. There are two categories: the funding priority recommendations. These are unfunded capital projects that have a critical or nature or a significant importance to our mission as an agency. We recommend that there be no more than 2 to 3 projects selected under the funding priorities. And then under the policy recommendations, these are public policy issues that have an immediate or significant impact on HART's mission as well. And we also recommend that you select no more than 3 or 4 selected policies statements for each legislative year. So the process for selecting priorities, well, of course, we're going to present you with a list of recommended priorities. We're asking that the committee individually consider and debate the relevance and the priority level of each of the recommendations that are presented to you today. You will also have an opportunity to discuss and recommend your own priorities that are not presented by staff. And finally, the committee will finalize the legislative priorities and make a formal recommendation for the Board of Directors at the November 5th meeting to approve. So what we're going to do, we're going to start off by talking about the funding priorities. We're going to go through and give you a quick overview of all the 3 recommended policies, and then we'll come back and allow you to discuss each one individually. I'm going to serve as your moderator through this process. And again, if you have any specific questions, we do have staff here that are subject matter experts that can help you in this process understand the issues or answer any questions that you may have. So the first priority that we're recommending is the heavy bus maintenance facility. This is a $17.4 million ask for the construction and demolition for a new facility. The project involves the site preparation, construction, and demolition work for a new facility. The original structure, the existing structure, was built in 1977, was last renovated in 1984 when we acquired the property. The facility does not meet current building code requirements, and it lacks the capacity to serve future expansion of our services. The total project cost for this particular project is between $41.7 and $47.2 million. The total project cost here that we have listed up here does not include the stormwater cost for correcting some of the stormwater management issues that we're having on site. But looking at the ask for a $17.4 million, this represents 55% of the cost minus the current $10 million that we have in funding for the project. As I understand, the Board of Directors approved roughly $3.2 million, or almost $3.3 million back in July for the design phase of this project. And this is, as it was mentioned earlier, this is a project that is extremely important for us to construct because of its critical nature in servicing our fleet vehicles, as well as addressing some of the challenges that we're having on the property with flooding.
Can I ask you a question, Jerry? You've got $17.4 million for construction and demolition. I'm looking at the backup material. You got 22.8. That's the total cost for the construction and demolition of that one building, or?
Well, actually, just unfortunately, you have to ignore the backup material. We were incorrect on the 22.1 million of the original ask, and that was a mathematical error on my part.
Okay. All right.
I was not taking into account the current 10 million that we had in place and some other.
That's okay. I just want to make sure if it was a 5 and change shortfall, 5 million and change shortfall, that's one thing, because the other stuff includes all the other things we need to do when it comes to flooding and all the other stuff. And also, this is at this location right now. This is the 40th Street location where we have
the 21st Avenue.
21st, excuse me. Yes,
yeah,
I always screw that up because I always think about 40th Street. So anyway, we had been talking about, and I just go hand in glove with this. We had been talking about expanding bus service, so that meant that we would have to get another facility in order to go forward with it. How does that all affect each other if the referendum passes next week? Because that's the whole, that's the biggest question we have right now.
All right. So if I can, first, if I can take your comments, questions in two pieces. First, let's talk about the funding. The 17.4, we have received $5 million of federal funding. We're anticipating $5 million of state funding from FDOT through the TIP. The 17.4 million represents and you've heard me say this 1,000 times, that we can ask for the moon, but if we don't have a match, it's just makes no sense to do that. In any event, $17.4 million ask equates to about a $3.48 million 20% match on our part. Based on our fund balance and based on how we've been growing at, that is, irrespective of the referendum, that is the amount that I feel comfortable that we could support as a match going into the next year or 2 fiscal years. So that's why that amount has changed, and it does take into account the money that's already been appropriated. The second, and you flip to the next slide, there is put a note in here about the referendum.
Right.
So as Mr. Presley mentioned, the board approved the design. We're in the process of designing the new facility based on the current facility's location and based on our current service model. So in a week, if the referendum passes, we're going to put the brakes on the maintenance facility project. Because if we are to, even if we were to hypothetically be able to advance the first 3 years of the funded TDP in the next 6 months, we don't have room for those buses.
Right.
So we would have to find a satellite facility right away to be able to do that.
So the question is that you're still not going to refurbish the current facility. If the referendum passes, you're going to have to look for a second location.
For another location.
So you can do that first as opposed to trying to.
Correct.
Okay, that was my question.
If the referendum
If the
passes.
referendum passes, right. I mean,
Okay.
I want to make sure
and
because.
if it doesn't, we're moving forward with the renovation of our current
All
facility.
right, I just want to make sure because the note was in there about the referendum, so I wanted to make sure where we were going. If we were talking about, well, now that we have money coming in, yeah, we're going to do this right away. We don't have to worry about the shortfall that we have, or as what you just said. Okay, I just want to make sure we're clear on that. Appreciate it. Thanks so much, Jeff.
I have a question with regards to that. So I understand that this facility, if we rebuild it in its current place, we have other investments already made there, and we can make it work, but only for the fleet that we have now or under currently. But I've asked about this several times, and it seems as though there is some benefits to be had by if we were to expand our fleet, even double it, even if the referendum passed, that we would have more than one operations facility to serve such a big county because of our physical size, and that it might make more sense to do that.
And again, if the referendum passes, we'll walk in and it will be a completely blank slate of where we go with our facility. We are on the hook. I don't want to use on the hook. We have an obligation with the federal government for 30 or 40 years of our compressed natural gas fueling station. That's not going to be closed down and shut down or flip over to alternate fuel buses automatically. We have an obligation to maintain that facility, and we will have to, and we will continue to do that. We may be looking at two separate facilities with maybe another compressed natural gas facility, maybe electrical chargers for electric buses, which is part of our conversation as well today. Or we may be looking at contract services. We may be looking at having someone else provide some type of service for us in some regions of the county where we won't have to have the responsibility of the actual capital infrastructure to support that. So as it stands right now, no referendum, we move forward with the renovation of our current facility. Referendum passes, we just stop, we reassess. There's a whole lot, and as Commissioner Merman mentioned when we first talked about the referendum, when it was still a petition, yes, when it was still an idea and a petition, is that if it passes, it's a whole new world. We go back out to the community, we find out what their needs are, or dig deeper into those needs since we know we have the transit development plan. But it really is a game changer. And when we have this facility, I mean, we're moving forward right now. I mean, it's a week away. We're in the process of the design now for that facility. But even if we do find, to your point, even if the referendum passes and we move and we find another facility, we still have a viable facility that will need some maintenance and some renovation depending on what the need of that footprint looks like. And right now we can't clearly state what that looks like until we know what happens after next Tuesday.
This raises for me several questions, your answer. So the federal investment in CNG, and I know that's part of the issue with federal investments, is that they expect you to maintain them for 30 or 40 years. And, you know, I imagine a future where there's going to be, in maybe a couple decades, a change to not using CNG, to being all electric. So my questions then are these: how much are we into? And I think that what could happen with that would be that the federal government there would be something that would excuse, that transition. But in terms of that, when you say the federal commitments for the CNG facility, how much is that federal commitment for that CNG? Like if in the worst of circumstances, the federal government said to us, you shut that down, you went all electric, you got rid of that, or you're not using that CNG facility, and we want you to repay this grant.
we will have to get back to you on that number. It's, the original project was, I will say 5 million, we added 10, it's probably around $20 million, but I'll get back to you.
The federal part of it, you're not sure though? It's part of that?
It was all.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'd like to know that.
Well, it wasn't all federal, we did put in some local dollars as well.
I think it's worth knowing.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think just from the standpoint of, given next week, the way that I'm looking at today's meeting is really kind of in the context of, our current situation, because, and not to assume that something may or may not happen, but I think it'll be, I think it might be most effective if we look at things from where we are today in that context. So just that's my thought.
Yeah, and I believe you'll see that throughout the rest of the priorities.
And if I can, we agree wholeheartedly, but that's why the ones, the funding requests that have a specific impact of referendum or no referendum, we only annotate. We want to make sure that we have that flexibility, because the board will be adopting this agenda the day before the election.
Right.
So we want to have the flexibility where we don't have to come back at the December meeting and revise everything that our legislative ask based on the referendum. Mm-hmm. Will the referendum change the tone of our ask? Absolutely. But we need something substantial to be able to take a week from today to the board to get approved, await the outcome of the election the following day, but still move forward with the flexibility of our asks most likely will not be changing. The scope or the depth or the need of those asks will change. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the footnotes are appreciated. Right. Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Jeff, so
yes,
I want to ask about this, because what is your funding plan to ask for the $22 million from the state?
And from the federal government and from anyone that has.
What are you specifically asking for from the state?
We'll go back.
Because you're going to have to be really specific. And the one thing I do know, because I chaired appropriate, is they're going to see $5 million going to HART in the work program.
Correct.
Guys, so they're probably going to say, well, why should we give more? And in $22 million, I would highly recommend not to ask for $22 million. I doubt seriously. I mean, I was lucky to get $5 million for Big Bend, and that was a critical roadway infrastructure issue. And we have not been successful in the legislature in the past, so I think we need to look at this as a building year. I'm just suggesting, but to go in with the $22 million ask is a little bit unrealistic.
I'm sorry. And I have.
What is your plan for the $22 million to get funded?
So our guidance before, and not from the board, but from previous support, was to ask big and ask for it all. And the same on the federal level. However, and I've had this conversation with Secretary Gwynn as well. All right, we have the 5 here. We have the 5 from the feds. We have the 5 from the state. We also just received the 2.3 for the streetcar. I mean, you can keep adding those up. They don't have anything to do with the specific ask. We can break this into phased components. One being the stormwater, and the stormwater ask would be under 5 million.
7 the most.
Okay, so that could be broken out in a component of, we want a stormwater enhancement, because we can't renovate that building without having the stormwater done.
Right.
So we could have a breakout of the stormwater as its own ask for the facility as a footprint. So the footprint itself is $17.4 million of what we need based on the other funding that we've received. However, stormwater isn't part of that ask. But we can look at it as an ask of that footprint and make that number smaller.
if
Yeah,
I
I
may.
mean, if I can, I'm just, yeah, I think you need to get the ask under, I mean, a big ask is right at 10 million or a little bit under. I mean, that's a big ask for us. Okay, enormous ask is 22 million, and it's not realistic. It's just my opinion. But because you're already getting 5 million in the work program.
Right.
So I'm thinking maybe asking for another 5 million might be realistic and is there any, are you working towards a P3? Do you have any match for the dollars? That's always critical with legislative minds. They always look and say, oh, are we going to be the one that's going to be on the hook for this project? And they don't always like that.
And that ask is predicated on the maximum amount of asks that we would have available in this fiscal year or next fiscal year, which is right around $4 million. So we can't go above. I mean, to your point, we couldn't go for even a bigger ask because we don't have the match. So anything under the 22 or the $17.4 million we have the ability to match those funds. So if we were to go to a $10 million ask or a $4 million ask for stormwater, we have the ability to show that we have that match in the bank. I mean,
okay.
we have the ability right now to do that.
The 5 million's for stormwater.
Stormwater, yes.
Okay, and you have 4 million to match that.
Yes.
Okay, so if you ask for maybe another, I still think it's a lot. I think the Hurricane Irma is going to take that a lot of that $1 billion. I mean, they're having to rebuild the whole town. And to me, I mean, you got help. I mean, there's just so much going on up there. So I think we just have to be realistic and go for something we can get. Maybe ask for a little bit higher, but don't try to be so high that they're just going to put it in a pile with all the other ones.
Good job.
And I'd like to add, just very quickly, just so the committee understands, from the legislative agenda perspective and developing a legislative agenda, what we're saying is this is a project, and this is the money that we're asking for, not necessarily in this year, in the sense of we expect to get it all this year, but we know this is what our need is, and then part of our legislative strategy is to figure out how much can we realistically expect to obtain, and what different pots of money, as Holland and Knight alluded to, where can we realistically achieve as getting a certain amount of money, which obviously will be a lower amount than what the legislative agenda identifies. And we know that this might be a legislative priority that is a multi-year priority. So the total ask may be 17.4 million that we whittled it down to from the 22. But realistically, in this legislative session, we may only be able to get 5 million or 4 million. And then this will need to be a priority in the upcoming year. And it's not just for the state, it's also for the federal. So we're looking at this as defining what our legislative agenda is as a whole, both on a state and local level and a federal level. And then how can we create a strategy that pieces together different fundings from the state, from the federal, and make it a workable project.
And I'll be honest, I would have expected to see that today, the 22 million, and how we're going to get there.
Going to get there.
I think that, I mean, it's fine to read all the, and it's great information, but I think we need to know how we're going to get there. I think to just throw it up in the air and say, oh, well, you know, I've heard 5, 4, 5, 10, you know, we've now got a lot of numbers thrown out there. So I think we need to have a plan. And that's going to be critical when you're writing up an ask for the legislature.
Yes, ma'am. And that's the next step is we want to go ahead and define what our agenda is, and then the next step is to develop the legislative strategy piece of this, and to come back to you with the legislative strategy that says this is how we're going to go forward. this is our communication strategy, and these are the things that we'll be going for from specific numbers to achieve what we're looking to accomplish.
Okay, so, I mean, maybe I just know too much about the process.
Yes, ma'am.
You gotta have a one-pager that
That is the plan.
really
That is the plan.
distinctly
Right, yes.
describes your plan and your strategy. I understand what you're saying. I think it's all great, but we've got probably 10, 15 days to get our plan done. We're in a legislative committee. We're supposed to be presenting to the board. We should have a plan. That's all I'm saying.
All right, I'm going to admit something. I'm wet behind the ears on this stuff, okay? But what I see here is, and again, Commissioner Merman, I want to really acknowledge having you in the room today. If you weren't here and we didn't hear these realities, we would never know. As far as where we're at, I think it's great. I think the conversation is great. We have the experts here. We have us here. We have staff here. I don't want to jump ahead in the slides, but what I would like to say is what I see is staff has given us kind of, all right, here's kind of the dream, or from the state legislature. Here's the dream number or the big ask, and you've well pointed out that we have to dial it down. My thought is we have to be specific and strategic, and that's where I kind of referred back to the presentation that Holland and Knight did, on the stormwater strategy. As we move through the other priorities, I'm looking at the CAD AVL, and I'm thinking, all right, the ask is $4.8 million. Well, is there some kind of tech or innovation money that, over here on the appropriation side where we need to connect maybe $2 million? I don't know. So, and it's a numbers game. So with my, being wet behind the ears, what I'm appreciating today is we're getting a glimpse into how this works, again, with your experience, and we do get to, I don't know, I'm really encouraged because we get to have the conversation, give staff better direction, specifics, and a little bit of strategy and reality. And it's a numbers game. So let's say we do our 3 asks, we have some number. Are we, and Commissioner Merman, I defer to you, we're not going to get all 3, right?
Oh,
we're not.
Okay, so here's my next.
We might get 1.
I would limit to 1.
Right.
And stick to it.
So do you even ask for all 3? You're
No.
saying you don't even go with 3? Really?
Go with 1.
Really? Okay. That's an
I mean,
eye-opener.
because you're
I didn't
asking
know.
for a big amount, and it is going to be a member appropriation ask.
But
It's not going to be from DOT, other than DOT's got an ask in there, but usually the work programs get funded, unless, a member of the legislature has a dispute over something they're asking for. But because you're asking for a little bit more, I mean, I think I would just stick with that. That's your big priority.
What if we do this, and again, deferring to your idea of the 1, they are prioritized from 1 to 3. My thought is that it's incumbent upon us to rely on Holland and Knight to kind of take and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, take what we talk about today, and perhaps there's another a rethink on that, given intel that they find out about. And they might say, you know what, you thought that number 1 was your priority, but based upon what we know here, you need to reconsider something else. I know we only have 10 days or so to do that, but
I definitely would not ask for 3. You could have a backup, but I think it's.
Well, I think we
didn't want to put it all, everything in one basket is what we were trying to do. We were trying to give some alternatives here. And as John mentioned, we wanted to have, this is a priority list, 1, 2, 3. And if for some reason we got shut down, so to speak, on 1, then at least we had others. Or if there was a member out there that was high on technology and said, wait a minute, I'm interested in your CAD. Can we help you out there? We wanted to have that option to flex.
Okay, so here's how it works. Here's how it works. You have to go to a member to sponsor your ask.
Correct.
And then you want to go in front of the delegation meeting and say, here's what we're asking for. If you have a lot of high dollar ask, basically they're just going to write you off. It's going to be, go over their head. I do agree on the technology. Sometimes there's a big push for technology in the legislature, yeah, you can have that as a backup. But theoretically, you want to go with an ask, and you've got a member sponsor in both the House and the Senate, and you want all those members to get behind that ask. Mm-hmm. But they can also know, I mean, you can educate them about other needs you have, but this is what our priority is. Because if you get off the page, then you're going to have dueling ask, and basically it's under HART. It's probably going to fall under transportation, you know, depending on who the chair is, will depend on how much we get.
If I may, just a quick follow-up. So I think, just from an effectiveness standpoint, talking about priority one, and it is still priority one, but right, unless there's something else. We revise it to 5 million or some number thereabout, and relate it to stormwater. Is that acceptable if we revisit that?
Yeah.
As far as direction to.
And this is where you can educate everybody. I think when we go forward with these, I think we need to show the total cost of what it will take to do. Now, that doesn't mean that's what we're asking for.
Correct, right.
And I think if you get specific, and again, this is where I could be corrected, if you go in there and ask for stormwater, okay, that we could actually find that in a different pot of money, and somebody might tell me differently. But, you know, I would prefer to go in there, as we mentioned before, with the 17.4, and understanding we get what we can get versus what I'm saying is I like to set that bar higher as opposed to lower, and then if we get anything in between, then that's more money than we had before.
Is the 5 million tip though money? That's for stormwater.
I don't know.
Is it?
I don't know.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So, but it's in the work program, which means it's going to be under transportation.
Yes.
I mean, you can try. What I would do is ask for 5 million for the stormwater, and then tell DOT you want the 5 million for the facility.
And we have.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So I guess if I can.
Yeah.
A couple things. So from your perspective, Commissioner Berman, and as a legislator, if you were to receive the HART one-pager that had $17.4 million on it, but then had it broken down underneath it, what would you focus on as a legislator? The big number?
No, because all legislators have multitude asks. Mm-hmm. And it's not just one. I mean, you're only going to get so much. Every member probably gets so much money, unless they're chair of the committee, and then they can help direct more. Right. But I think, yes, they need to know the total cost of the facility, and that's why I'm saying it needs to be broken down of how you're going, what your plans are to completely fund the facility.
And as Mr. Presley mentioned, that is the next step. After I know we talked about the dollars and we have the dollars, but what we really need from the committee is the prioritization of the projects themselves. And then we will work with staff and Holland and I on breaking that project down into those pieces that are much more descriptive for those decision makers in Tallahassee to be able to do. So if we can, if hypothetically the committee today approves the number one ask of the maintenance facility, starting this afternoon, we're going to start breaking that maintenance facility down into those known components that we can make into a one-pager that make it very clear that here's the total cost of the project, but here are the incremental costs by fiscal year that we would be asking you for assistance for funding.
If I may just briefly, so if I was the one told to go into a legislator's office and I had the one-pager and I had these priorities in front of me, this is how I would lay it out. You can't have a CAD AVL without a bus, right? So the heavy maintenance facility is our highest priority, bottom line. Next is a CAD AVL, And then, you know, on the innovative side, we have electric buses. So I just want to express that I'm okay with the priorities, and I think you guys did a fair job of that. So
I would just like to reiterate too that I'm totally okay with the priorities. And as I said, I think it's really critical that, I mean, I'm very worried about the operations center being operable, especially if we have Hurricane Irma come here and have a, you know, something like that, or even just a really bad storm. From what I understand, I think it's very threatened, but not only it's just so out of date, and it's really a barrier to us growing, whether we get the tax or not, to us being able to function. To me, as I said, to me, it is bar none the top regional priority for moving people. I mean, top more than anything. And above all else, and so I just think it's really critical that we build on that. I'm glad to have it outlined too in this way, and to kind of understand the big picture a little bit more than the. And I appreciate your points, Commissioner Merman. I just, you know, like having it set out this way, like having this discussion about maybe what we need and then what we might be able to achieve. And I think it's an important discussion that we've taken a year to have, so I'm glad to have it now. And we still don't know, you know, obviously things could be very different next month depending on who goes where, even if we have the same or somewhat the same Senate and the same House. Certainly having it, depending on what governor it is, and depending on a little, you know, somewhat on kind of the, if there's some somewhat shifts in power and things like that, about what we can do and about what kind of priority might be put on transit. So I think it's great to have all of that available to look at. And I do like the priorities a lot and think they're great things to identify, even if it's not for the legislature or the federal government, even if it's just for us starting to identify what we need to do. I think it's a good one too.
And if I could, I would suggest, because it's a part of this particular first ask as priority, we probably should revisit with the city about the stormwater issues. When we first, and you probably recall, we did this about 5 years ago or 4 years ago, when we started looking at how we might acquire some land, partner with Swift Mud and with the city about trying to put the facility in having some kind of retention pond or some other thing in order to do it. Now that we have passed the, you know, a couple of years ago, our special assessment for stormwater, you might want to talk to them about how we are actually, you know, alleviating that particular situation. And you may not need as much of a, you'll have a little bit better partner now with the city than you did before.
And, well, I think the city's been a very good partner through this entire stormwater effort. I will say, from the time that they, and with Swift Mud.
Well, partners are good when they're talking to each other. They're even better when they have money. So that's what I'm saying. So we have a little bit more money now to deal with stormwater, so you might want to revisit it to see how we can actually partner better.
And we will do that. And a lot of the need at the 21st Avenue facility, a lot of the flooding issues have been reduced and mitigated somewhat based on that relationship that we've had with the city and Swift Mud. A lot of it now is the internal infrastructure that is underneath our parking lot, where we're starting to see not sinkholes but caved in areas, and it's just it needs to get done.
Got it. Thanks.
Have you even tried to do a P3 on that? Like, there may be somebody that has some property somewhere that is looking, and is this, I don't think you're in the opportunity zone, are you?
I don't think we are.
I don't know if it's defined that far.
No, I don't think it
goes
is.
that far. Are you in any economically depressed area? Do you know?
We will look at that.
But I'm just saying, you know, a P3, I mean, it does take some time to write it up,
right? But
to just put it out there, I mean, you never know. I mean, there are developers that have property all over the place looking for something to.
If I may, and that's kind of what I mentioned earlier, just keep an eye on the P3 topic, because there's some concerns nationally that it's, I don't know, just keep an eye on it. I'm not discounting it, but so, and I'm hoping it's a good funding source, but there are some indicators that are happening right now that are just show signs that it's there's some trouble there. So in that general industry.
So for transparency on the maintenance facility, if I have mentioned this before during our budget discussions, but if the referendum does not pass and we move forward with this plan of renovation, I had planned on moving forward with a financing plan in the next 6 months to be able to get this going. I mean, we have the ability to set aside that debt service to be able to do this. And with any components of this additional funding that we would get from the state or for the federal government, we'll just whittle that amount down to a lesser amount to borrow. But I put a hold on that discussion with any outside financial entities until we find out what happens during the election. So if the referendum does not pass, we're still going to move forward. I mean, we have to get that facility done. It has to get done before the next couple of hurricane seasons come and go.
I agree.
We have to do it. So irrespective of the actual funding that we would receive, we're moving forward no matter what. If we don't get another dime from the feds or from the state, the maintenance facility has to get done. And we'll be using local dollars to accomplish that. So any amount that we can get for this facility will be very grateful for, and use it to cobble these pieces together. But again, this isn't we're only going to move forward only if we get any additional funding. It's not. We're past that stage. This is a project that has to get done. So.
Okay. For the respect of time and all, and I've heard a few folks mention it. Do we need to go through the rest of the priorities? I believe everybody has read them, or do I have a motion to move forward with the 3 priorities as outlined?
I'll move that we move forward with the 3 priorities.
I've got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so moved. We'll move forward as 3 priorities. We'll go to the policies now.
Okay. All right. So on our priority discussions, again, these are recommendations coming from staff. This committee can choose to move a policy issue forward, or it can choose to not move it forward, and again, you will have opportunity to discuss your own policy issues. The first policy priority that we will discuss today is in relation to the automated vehicle technology. As you may be aware, HART has a current AV project that we have been working on. There's been a lot of policy changes that have been coming out of Congress, or excuse me, out of our executive branch with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the US DOT. And it's important for us because of the current project that we have. So what we're doing is we're making the recommendation that HART will adopt the following policy statement as it relates to automated technology. We will actively support legislation, policy, rules, and regulations that promote a safe environment for testing and implementing AV technologies in the Tampa Bay region and the state of Florida, create uniformity in regulations and policies, and support reasonable retention of information and data. We've been partnering with the FDOT since May of 2016 on our project. In August of 2018, NHTSA placed a hold on AV waivers due to safety concerns, and then on October the 3rd, the US DOT released a modification of its automated vehicle guidance policies, rules, and regulations known as version 3.0. regarding this new technology. Now, HART wants to ensure that any new laws, rules, regulations, or policy changes helps to promote public safety, obviously, that it creates uniformity, and it supports the testing and implementation of this new technology, and that it does not unreasonably inhibit or obstruct HART's AV project for the future. We do see this as viable technology, and you know, we want to be able to continue to research it to see if it's applicable for our agency and for our region. And so with that, we would love for you guys to discuss your thoughts on this particular policy and whether or not you feel like it is something that we can adopt and move forward with.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jerry. Good presentation so far. I'm just going to jump right in. I'm a supporter of AV technology. I know there have been some issues, and it's has kind of paused on this. But when I look at this relative to the other priorities, which I think are all good recommendations from staff, again, I don't mean to jump ahead in the slides, but there's a financial component. If you want to jump ahead one slide to priority 2 in the issue summary. Again, I'm not knocking electric vehicle technology by any means, but an electric bus costs $700,000 versus a diesel fuel bus, which is $450,000. So I think when I compare those two policy priorities, we have a general policy, related number one priority, but the second one has this kind of, I wouldn't call it a financial burden, but it has this component that says, we want you to support this, but it actually costs more. So from a priority standpoint, I like the idea of going with AV as number one and with the EV as after that. Because funding is our challenge, and Commissioner Merman, I think her approach to this, now that we have Holland and Knight on board on building blocks, I think we need to look at it that way, and so I support the first two priorities in this order.
Go.
And thank you, Director Melendez. I wanted to give a quick update. This doesn't have a direct impact hopefully on the decision to support AV or not, but I wanted to give a quick update on, Mr. Presley gave an overview of where we have been with our current AV. We are bringing the contract to the November board. We were holding off until the December board, but we're bringing it to the November board, which is a week from today. The reason being is that with our Holland and Knight support in Washington, as well as discussing this with APTA, as well as the manufacturers of the vehicles. They feel that there is an ability to work through this waiver issue, but it is a catch-22. You can't apply for a waiver until you have a signed contract to deliver AV services in a specific corridor. So we don't know specifically if our waiver will be denied until we award the contract and apply for the waiver. So instead of holding this off, we're just going to move forward with the contract award in November, have our contractor go through the process of requesting the waiver for the Marion Transit Way corridor, and then hypothetically, if the waiver is granted, then we're good. If it is not able to be granted, we have the ability throughout the contract of them not being able to provide the crux of the contract deliverable to void or cancel that contract. So the safest way for us to proceed now is just to award the contract and then go through the waiver process. So I know I had said I was going to kick this to the end of the year. We feel now, based on the conversations that the manufacturers have had with NHTSA and those in the executive branch, that let's award, move through the waiver process. Dan, is that summarized? Okay. So next Monday, we will be bringing that back to the board for approval. The committee has already reviewed it, but we will present again and go through that process. But we're ready to move forward. So now that that's moving forward, it shows the importance of this is one of our legislative priorities as a policy directive of really having the state work on setting forth the standards and the regulations for safety and operation within the urban corridors in the state of Florida. I don't think it's been lockstep with the federal government. This tells our legislative delegation that we support AV technology, and we support regulations, policies, and laws that allow us to deliver this type of service. I think.
Vice Chair.
Thank you. I very much recommend priority number 2 as a first priority. And the reason I do that is, as I've stated so many times before, is I do believe that the entire automotive car fleet, truck fleets, bus fleets everywhere are moving to electric. I know, Director Melendez, you just stated the difference between diesel at 300,000 bus and 700,000. It says here for electric bus 700,000, but we're not buying any more diesel buses, from what I understand. And so we're then comparing it to, and they're heavily polluting, and they've practically broken our agency this year with the cost of diesel going up. But then we have the CNG at 450,000, but over the lifetime of the buses, both in repair and cost for fuel, it significantly saves us money to move to electric vehicles. I mean, that's pretty much what we're finding out from all the other places, and that's why every place is doing it, and that's why the federal government is funding it. I think it's the most likely way that we can move into a better technology future, and I feel totally comfortable with making that a first priority, and making it first a priority, but making it a first priority rather than a second priority. I have some discomfort with the automated vehicle as it's stated here. And that's just that I keep up on all the automated vehicle technology. I know that Steve Wozniak made a big statement a couple weeks ago that was kind of shook things a bit, and he said that there's no way to make automated vehicles safe, and there's no way to do the kinds of, he saw it as being decades and decades off. The problem, as we know, there have been accidents or are issues that are happening. I can tell you that when I was here, and there was, I think it was May was the automated. So I rode their vehicle twice here in a demonstration, and the very first time, and I'm not sure whose issue it was, but our vehicle and everybody on the vehicle let out a scream because we were almost like smashed by a HART bus, and that was pretty scary. And then the second time I got on it, and I wasn't sure what the issue was or why that happened, but we pushed us almost into the other oncoming lane of traffic. The second time was that we went around, and it was a marked crosswalk, and there was a woman crossing it, and she had a shopping cart of some sort, could have been a baby stroller, whatever, but our automated vehicle did not stop. And we had our driver who hit the brakes, and we all lurched forward. I think that there are significant issues that are still remain to be resolved. So I think there's, in the second one we have, and does not unreasonably inhibit or obstruct HART's AV project. We have HART wants to ensure that any new law, rule, or regulation or policy change promotes public safety. Yes. Creates uniformity and supports testing and implementation. That's fine, of this new technology. But I am uncomfortable with does not unreasonably inhibit or obstruct HART's AV project, because I think if it's safety that is the thing that would do that, then that's an okay obstruction.
And the actual policy recommendation that we're recommending, and that was kind of in the description side that you saw that particular language.
Right.
But the actual recommended policy is that HART will actively support legislation, policy, rules, and regulations that promote safe environment for testing and implementing AV technologies in the Tampa Bay region in the state of Florida, creates uniformity in regulation and policies, and supports reasonable retention of information and data. And that's a precise policy.
That's fine, and I'd make that a second priority. And I just wanted to speak, though, to the back part of it, which was the recommended priority, the logic behind it, to say that last sentence makes me feel very uncomfortable because of, I think, safety, 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 and making sure that these operate. And I mean, there's lots of problems with the latest information and how the automated vehicles might intersect with the walkable world. And I think that that's a real concern about how they would move forward, because we want to, because I'm all, and I think the public and everyone is looking for walkable communities now. They're looking for transit that works, and to live. So many people are moving closer to home. They don't want to do the longer commutes and everything. So I just it's looking more and more like the automated vehicles as the technology is moving forward now might have a long time before they know how to stop for a person crossing a street or a kid that runs out for a ball or any of the other people that just jump into the kind of crossing and things, and pedestrians safety, which is such an issue here, that have very concerns about that.
Okay.
I definitely can't argue with safety. It's safety and welfare are paramount. One thought on the I guess an opportunity. I have a friend up in Tallahassee, and from what I understand, they operate electric buses in Tallahassee. I've never ridden on one up there, but I don't know if there might be an opportunity to do a little more research. Again, I know we have a tight window. We need to get this done today, but it would be interesting to see how it's going up there, because some of our state legislators probably may ride those buses.
They have 2 electric buses there that they got early on in the first grant, which all these agencies applied for, but HART did not, unfortunately.
So
but now we have 2 in St. Petersburg too, if you want to ride them.
Yeah, actually, I might could do that. Yeah. So it's not a network-wide thing. It's more of a pilot, sounds like, or not pilot, but just a starter 2 vehicles up in Tallahassee.
I should say they're moving into more deployment. They were one of the first ones, and Gainesville got them. St. Petersburg is just getting theirs. It from time of order, and this is true of all buses, to the time that you can, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but to the time that you can actually deploy the bus is about 2 years. And there was a limited number of electric vehicles even being made in the country, because there was Proterra, then they started BYD in California. Now they went from 150 a year to, and there's 2 in Canada now, but 150 a year to 500 or 600. So
yeah, I have a quick response, but Jeff.
So to the AV a recommended policy priority, and again, the recommended policy statement is that the HART is going to support legislation, policies, rules, and regulations that create incentives for transit systems to purchase electric fleet vehicles. Right. So back to the comment about the cost, what we're looking at here are policies for the legislature to create incentive programs.
So it's not so specific that
correct.
Right.
And it's as an example with the St. P ones that are just now rolling out. I mean, they receive those funds from the feds to be able to roll those out, and also with that 2-year commitment, it's if we were to start today and we're given the money for those buses, it's the ordering time, it's the infrastructure. You have to permit, and then you have to receive the charging stations, and then decide on which route is going to be able to have those utilized. And so it is I mean, this is definitely a multi-year strategy to be able to request the funds. But this is really why I really like this policy statement, is it's setting forth hey, we support anything that will provide additional incentive money for us to be able to have vehicles that reduce overall carbon emissions. And I think that's the point.
I think, and I think the policy statements I think they're fine. Just a quick follow-up note. There has been a lot of support in the state legislature from in leadership from Senator Brandis on AV technology. What I would be curious to find out more on is, well, if I was a legislator and I was given the 1-pager and I knew that electric buses cost more, it might almost send not a mixed message, but you're asking for money over here, but your top priority is you want policies that will trigger additional costs over what you have now. You have you guys were the first to do CNG in the state, the refueling. You're headed down the CNG path. So to me, I don't know. I definitely concur with the safety side, and I mean I can't argue with that. But those are my thoughts on it.
Can I just make a recommendation?
Please.
These aren't. You don't know what issues are going to come up in the legislature, so these aren't really priorities. These are recommendations, and so I wouldn't necessarily put a priority on these issues, because if a policy comes up, it might match with one of these recommendations. So I would just say leave off priorities and just make them policy recommendations.
Okay, good point. Good point.
Okay.
Yep.
Because I did want to say you do not want to make Senator Brandes upset
I know.
about
AV.
us not being for AV.
Yeah, for the sake of clarity on this, how does, as collectively as a board, do you guys support the policy statement for the AV technology?
Yes.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, I mean.
So let's talk then about, we talked a little bit about the recommended policy statement for policy 2 already, but for the policy statement of HART will support legislation and policy rules and regulations that create incentives for transit systems to purchase electric vehicles. Do you guys support that?
We're there.
As a policy statement?
Sure. I have a question.
Yep.
On all of these. You have at the top, is this just a mistake? Electric vehicle AV technology instead of EV?
Yeah, it's just a mistake.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah, that's EV.
Just wanted to be clear.
AV electric buses. No.
That was a good one.
That was
And go to policy 3 here.
Can't have AV.
okay. So the next one is
That's what they all will be.
the regulatory compliance and unfunded mandates. The recommended statement is that HART will actively support legislation that provides funding for local government agencies to meet the state and federal mandated regulatory compliance. HART will also actively educate federal and state elected officials regarding the challenges created by state and federal policies, etc., that create a financial burden on local agencies without offering a financial program that assists such local agencies with compliance. As you all know, regulatory compliance is one of the biggest challenges that we face and transit agencies face in general. A lot of regulations come down from the federal and state level. ADA is perhaps one of the most challenging of those, and they often don't provide the funding that's needed for implementation. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the CAT AVL situation that we have. We've got equipment that is reaching its life cycle, and we have ADA regulations that mandate us to provide this service that we need to provide. And so what we want to ensure moving forward is that when it comes to any new regulations that come out, whether it's regarding ADA or regarding transit services, that if they change the policy on us and there is a financial cost or burden that is associated with that new cost, that we are actively working with them to help create a funding mechanism that will help us to become compliant as an agency. And so, this is an issue that I think is not only near and dear to us, it's near and dear to all local governments and all local government agencies across the board, and we definitely want to support that.
Go back to your statement, Jerry, though, your policy statement again.
I have a question about this. Where does this come from? Is this like a model that was used elsewhere?
I think it's just a general statement that's been crafted, just within,
As much as I don't like being forced on unfunded mandates as a lawyer, I'm, ADA compliance, ADA law is a federal law.
Yep.
So rather than state law, and as much as I believe that, because as I understand it, about 1/6 of our budget here is spent on providing to those who need it, who cannot ride our regular buses during our routes and stuff. I think that should be something that the public and that we should talk about more and be understood more. And I really think it would be something that the state I would like to see them, you know, do that for all communities in terms of operations entirely statewide. But I'm not sure about in terms of placing it as an unfunded mandate as much as looking at that we would look to the state for operational dollars, or to the federal government for operational dollars to provide.
And we can certainly change that wording.
Because I feel uncomfortable with the way this is phrased, or the.
That's why I went back to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can take a look at that wording and come up with a, you know, because essentially what's going to be there is within, you know, it won't say, and I use that, the title, just as a general category title, not necessarily as the title that will be used in the documents. So we will just have a policy statement, and the policy statement will appear in there as it's written here. And it won't say, we won't mention the funded mandate.
I would say a policy too of where we try to secure funding to do, you know, to meet criteria. We try and secure federal and state funding to in operations as well, to and capital and operations to meet you know, ADA mandates.
Just one substantive note there. So you're saying you want to change this to say that we will seek it, but I think that kind of runs, the language in the current statement says that they will provide. So it's kind of changing the substantive nature of the whole policy statement if we change it to seek. Because then that puts the burden back on us, which is the whole point of the policy statement.
Well, I guess we could say we believe they should provide, or you know, that's what I was trying to say. I believe they should provide
kind of
the operations to make us to support us to meet these mandates.
So a little, just a tweaking of the language.
Just a small tweak.
But that doesn't lose the intent or the spirit of the statement.
No, except that I would, instead of kind of having difference with the mandates themselves, that we should get that support.
The only comment I had on the statement was, and correct me if I'm wrong, the elected officials here, I don't like to say educate, we're going to educate somebody. I'd rather say we're going to discuss with them. I don't know how you feel about that, but I look at that.
It's really more advocacy than education.
Right.
I mean, you're advocating
there you go.
for, you know, for policies that don't create financial burdens. I mean, when they put the homestead exemption on the ballot, that's going to create a financial burden. That's an unfunded mandate. Okay. So I think, you know, they're famous for doing that. The state is. So you gotta leave the words the way they are, but I think you can always add, you know, we would like to get financial assistance to comply.
Okay. And do we have another one, Jerry?
So this was other issues that came up, and so this has to do with the prohibitions on passing a stop transit vehicle. HART is suggesting coming up with the following policy statement: that HART will support legislation that prohibits motor vehicles from passing a stop transit bus in unsafe areas and or limits the ability of vehicles from going around the buses in areas where there are no bus pullouts when it may be unsafe for vulnerable road users. This has to do with basically essentially treating a transit bus in certain areas, a two-lane rural highway where there's limited ability for someone to pass or pass safely, kind of treating our transit bus like a school bus. And
I'm not crazy about this at all.
Good morning, Chair, members of the board. Basically, this initiative was proposed by Polk County Transit Authority. It's being recommended next year by the Florida Public Transportation Association. It will not affect rural areas like the city of Tampa. It will mainly affect very narrow roads where there are no bus pullouts. And what has happened in the past is that vehicles trying to pass a bus have caused accidents, either with pedestrians were trying to cross in front of the bus. So it will not be affecting the core services that we have. We might have one or two routes in very narrow neighborhoods that may be affected by this, but simply they're proposing it and they're seeking all the transit agencies to support it. As I said before, it is proposed by Polk County Transit Authority. It will not affect most of the urbanized areas as we currently operate.
Well, as it moves forward, there will be a lot more clarity added to it, right?
Yeah, I think so. My name is Kyle.
If it does move forward.
Director of Safety with HART. One of the key things I would mention as an analogy to it is currently there is a yield to the bus law that we have where it's really a tool within a law enforcement officer's toolbox to where they're not going to be pulling people over all the time, but if there is a violation, they'd be able to cite someone at that stronger penalty. So in terms of as you're framing this and thinking about whether to support this policy recommendation or not, I give that example of the yield to bus law as something that's really law enforcement is going to have that discretion based on the unique situation. So it's not a broad brush on every single situation that may occur.
Right.
I'll support it the way it is. I don't think it's until it gets clarity through what they're doing in the state.
Okay. Just a very quick side comment, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think again, safety is paramount, and I think that what's interesting about this is that it actually relates to potential innovation or AV or connected vehicle technology where, yes, you can implement a law, but isn't it even that much more effective to actually improve technology so people don't make that mistake, you know? Right. So I'm looking forward to those opportunities as well.
Yeah. My first thought on it was it's resource intensive, but as Commissioner Merman mentioned, this will be debated heavily as it goes forward. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. So the way I see it right now is we've got four of what I would say are policy statements out there, if you will. We're going to, if I'm not mistaken, we're going to drop priorities off of it and just say these are four of our policy statements.
And I'll move that we recommend it to the board.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, got a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed?
I just have a question before.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wondered, because I had kind of recommended a little bit of tweaking of some of that. So are we doing, when we move forward with that tweaking that we seem
with
to
the
agree on?
changes.
Just
Yeah,
wanted to
with the
make sure.
changes. I'm sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So
So
that's-
I'm for it.
Okay, and that's been approved with the changes, recommended changes, okay. All right, I believe this concludes our meeting. Any last
I
comments?
do. Oh, you go
Go
first.
right
You had your hand up first.
I just wanted to say that I'm really pleased to have this meeting and to be really discussing these really important priorities. In fact, I'm so excited about this. I can think about 10 other things to start to bring up and start to think about moving forward. But I'm very, very happy that we took this step. I thank you very much for Chair McLean for putting this together. And I think it was a really productive and good discussion. So.
Just real quick, two things. Are there any of the items on any of the lists that we could partner with Pinellas on? Because that's always been kind of a bugaboo. And plus, Chris Sprouse from St. Pete is going to be the incoming speaker the following 2 years. So they have a lot of clout in Pinellas right now with him being the incoming speaker. So
Good point.
I'm just suggesting that you may want to get a partnership going with Pinellas on maybe some of the funding items or policy.
I would suggest on the CAD AVL stuff,
That's perfect.
that's the first place to start.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
And as a matter of fact, we have the PSTA legislative priorities. They just finished up theirs within the last week, and they don't align with ours, but they are pretty close, and I'll work with
Why don't
Mr.
you
Miller
work
on-
with them and see if there's a joint ask we can make or something, because I do think that, and given that our bus shelter might be a regional, maybe there, I don't know, it just get creative,
I'll work with Brent.
because it does help. And, what was this?
Let's take that for action, Jeff, if we can get back to this committee on it.
Oh, I would, I think when we left our last meeting almost a year ago, we did discuss, that we needed to discuss how we were going to bring more money into HART, not just from governmental dollars. So I still think that discussion needs to be had, whether it be any kind of public-private partnership. I know the streetcar does, that advertising, but I think it's important for us to analyze that and see if there are other opportunities out there.
Yeah, good point too. We can take that for action, but I believe part of that is the Finance and Budget Committee too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I brought up P3s quite a couple times today. That was more on the construction side nationally.
Okay.
I think I'm all for, and I think I agree with Commissioner Merman. Because you're talking about general business partnerships and things like that.
I mean, we're doing one on the ferry. We're doing one on our community center up in New Tampa, and so far so good.
Yeah. So I want to echo. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I've always thought a natural would be, although I don't know if we, if this passes, a referendum passes, but at West Shore, it's always struck me about the fact that it just seems like they could definitely support a circulator service in some kind of P3 fashion.
If West Shore is, and I think that was on the list for a circulator. And I would definitely meet with the West Shore Alliance. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we can do. A lot of these circulators, unfortunately, probably not as much in South County because, they don't have the business density like they do at West Shore. But actually even Hyde Park up to Tampa Heights, over to Ybor, there's certainly possibilities there too. But I think we've just got to start to get creative. And I know if you need assistance, we have people in the county that can give you direction.
Fantastic.
And just a suggestion about that, we did the study with them. We went to the West Shore Alliance. This was a few years back. The hotels were really the things that were keeping us back. They did not want to buy in. They did not want to be a participant. They did not want to put any dollars in or even to do advertising because they have their own little shuttle that takes people around, which to me is ridiculous. They could save money both on the vehicle, on the insurance, on paying a driver, all this other stuff, and they weren't willing to get involved in it. So just, dust off what we talked about before, because we did do a study on it. And
There's a new study now.
I know, I understand that. I'm just saying we need to make sure that the buy-in, when we start talking about partnerships with people, they have to be willing participants, and that's the problem. They weren't willing to participate with us, so. Appreciate it.
Just one final note. Now that we have gotten the 2019 legislative recommendations, I would like for you guys to start thinking about a short-term legislative agenda, coming up with a 3 to 5 year plan for our legislative strategy, and hopefully this will be something we'll bring back up at your next committee meeting.
Okay, thank you. And as I close, I want to say thank you to all our elected officials right here. I think your inputs are invaluable to how we kind of shape this, priorities and how we move forward. So thank you very much for the great inputs and for the active participation here by all. I appreciate it very much.